Well, let's say that Ripple wins and the SEC loses. Ripple doesn't get a remedy stage to say, hey, you cost us $200 million and you asserted that we were reckless because it's so obvious that XRP is a security when your own people couldn't make up their mind.
In today's video, Attorney John Deaton discussed the latest with the SEC Ripple XRP lawsuit, the recent summary judgments from Ripple and the SEC, and what's next for the procedural process, likelihood of a settlement soon.
I get the question of why hasn't the SEC been held accountable for the harm it commits? You know, they're supposed to go after companies who commit fraud and who violate the law and harm investors. But what about when they harm investors? And so everybody knows that immediately 9 days after the Ripple lawsuit was filed, I put in a federal pleading in a writ of mandamus that this lawsuit appeared to be used as a weapon. So what makes them confident to be able to do those kind of things? Why do SEC lawyers get to ignore the law and assert allegations that they know are without merit? All right. For example, alleging XRP itself is a security, knowing full well that in the 76 years since the Howey case was decided, dealing with an investment contract scenario, never has the court held that the underlying asset itself is a security. We know that Bitcoin in 2013 was packaged and sold as an investment contract. We're not calling Bitcoin a security. We know that oranges and orange groves were utilized and packaged into an investment contract. We didn't go around saying that the acres of orange groves or the oranges themselves were securities. Whiskey, matter of fact, reminds me to my good friend out there, Stephen. Thank you, brother. Thank you for this bourbon. But the point I'm saying to you is that whiskey, bourbon, any product can be packaged, marketed, and sold as an investment contract. Condos, chinchillas, the list goes on. So what allows them to do this, right? To act with impunity. It's as if we're playing Monopoly and someone gave the SEC a get out of jail free card. And so the question is, can we hold them accountable, right? Can we hold them accountable? Because we know what they do. We've heard it firsthand by Jeremy Kauffman in the library case. We're going to bankrupt you. That's what they threatened to do to library. And guess what they did? They bankrupt library, costing them hundreds of thousands of dollars in an investigation that lasts 3, 4, 5 years. And then that's before the lawsuit's filed. Then file the lawsuit and they got to come up with millions to pay a lawyer to defend them. Right? What allows them to get away with this? We can look at library and we can look at Ripple. Both of those cases are the perfect examples because they're non-fraud cases. No misrepresentation was alleged. No fraud was alleged. No omission was alleged. Dragon Chain, a case I'm familiar with, that's a non-fraud case where they did the same thing, years of an investigation. Then on the eve of the statute of limitations, they filed a lawsuit. So who did the SEC protect in the library case? It certainly wasn't LBC token holders, because remember, there was the SEC won and there was a remedy stage. And Naomi Brockwell thankfully had the courage to allow me to use her name and her example to go into court and say, Judge, we're appealing to you directly, because the SEC admitted. They admitted that many thousands of LBC token holders did not view LBC as investment, but they took the position that even if 90% of LBC token holders did not view it as an investment, the first prong of Howey, that it's still a security. So they didn't protect them. They wouldn't give a no action letter to Naomi Brockwell. They wouldn't give any kind of guidance. So XRP holders, who did they protect? Hell, they attacked me personally. That's something we'll talk about later, and why they're allowed to do that. They're allowed to defame a person and say that they're out there threatening people with violence when they're not. And so when we sit back and we're thinking about these Hinman emails that we're going to get, what allows them to do it? Think about Chris Larson and Brad Garlinghouse for a second. They alleged that they were so reckless, right, that in knowing and not knowing that XRP was an investment contract. That's what they alleged, that they're reckless in not knowing it. But the Hinman emails are going to tell us a different scenario. They're going to tell them that although they alleged these two people were reckless, the SEC itself couldn't make up their mind. And we're going to go over that. As we go over this timeline, and I'm going to answer that question, the whole purpose of today's sort of tutorial on the law, let's go back to what a federal judge, not what John Deaton said, but what a federal judge said, Judge Netburn, in the Ripple case. There you have it. Hypocrisy in arguing to the court on the one hand that the speech is not relevant to the market's understanding of how or whether the SEC will regulate cryptocurrency. And on the other hand, that Hinman sought and obtained legal advice from SEC counsel in drafting his speech suggests that the SEC is adopting its litigation positions to further its desired goal and not out of faithful allegiance to the law. Certainly not out of protecting investors, but that's what we have. And then we have 7.5 years. It's traded in the markets and no action is done. During all those ICO prosecutions, right? There were 57 of them between 2017 and 2019. Ripple wasn't sued. So it makes us think, why was Ripple sued? That's why I said that the way the suit went down and all this evidence points to nefarious reasons. Call me a conspiracy theorist all you want, but me and my 75,000 people have proven otherwise, okay? Now let's answer why. Why do they get away with it? Oh, and sorry, thank you to my people, Grunfest letter. Let's not forget that, the Grunfest letter that basically said, all you people are leaving at the SEC. The Grunfest, the most esteemed SEC commissioner possibly in history of the United States, respected by Republicans and Democrats alike. He was actually a Democrat appointed by Ronald Reagan. Okay, so that's how respected the man is at Stanford Law School as a professor as well. He said that if you file this lawsuit, it calls into question the use of discretion. In other words, people, I'm calling out your motive. And let's not forget that Joe Grunfest helped the Ethereum founders. He's no XRP hack, okay, or anything like that. Just like I own ETH and I'm not an XRP maximist. Okay, so it gets us to that ultimate question of why. All right, why do they get to have such impunity? Okay, and can we hold them accountable? And it comes down to a concept of sovereign immunity. Okay, now here's a really quick tutorial on what sovereign immunity is. It comes back from English common law, and it basically said that if you were the king or the king's officers, then you could not be sued under the law. Why? Because the king can do no wrong. The king is above the law because he is the king. And that was the law. Well, when the colonies took over, they got away with that, kingship stuff. But lo and behold, the doctrine of sovereign immunity continued in American jurisprudence. And probably in 1783 or whenever the year was, let's face it, the federal government did not have a lot of power back then. There certainly weren't the federal agencies exercising power the way they are today. So that's basically it. You can't sue. And so Congress then, though, started doing something and they started delegating authority. And in the 1930s, they started creating laws. We know that the Securities Act of 1934 was created. And what's happened is we've given too much power to federal agencies. And that's why now it's gotten so far out of hand that you have this thing that's being pursued called, and the library last brief brought it up, which is the question of the major questions doctrine, if you will, which says that unless the federal agency was given very specific guidance to do what it's trying to do, it can't do it. Okay, so we've had sovereign immunity, but then there's another problem, and that is that 1946, Congress enacted, the same year Howey coincidentally was passed, they enacted the Federal Tort Claims Act in 1946. Now, it softened the doctrine of immunity, of sovereign immunity a bit, and it allows a person to sue the federal government for negligence if you have been harmed. But incredibly, they did not take out the exemption for intentional acts. So, for example, sovereign immunity and under the Federal Tort Claims Act, federal agencies like the SEC can't be held accountable for intentional wrongdoing, such as defamation, abusive process, and malicious prosecution. They're exempt. So why do you think that think about this case, right? Remember the SEC lawyers attacked me? They said that Deaton they told a federal judge that John Deaton actually threatened to commit bodily harm, violence on Jay Clayton. When they know damn well I did a mock cross-examination, a silly little video where I was infusing my cousin Vinny video clips. And they said I promoted drug use and all this. Why are they allowed to do that? They can defame me because it's not defamation, because they can get away with it. I can't sue them and say, hey, you misled the court and did this and did that, right? They get away with this stuff because of these doctrines that have been said. Well, let's say that Ripple wins and the SEC loses. Ripple doesn't get a remedy stage to say, hey, you cost us $200 million and you asserted that we were reckless because it's so obvious that XRP is a security when your own people couldn't make up their mind whether it was a security or not. And you remember how the SEC tried those bullying tactics? Well, this gentleman in this article discusses that stuff. He brings up how the SEC attacked Garlinghouse and Larson. Remember, they were going after all of their bank records. And there was all this litigation a couple years ago, whether the SEC had a right to get all their credit card statements, all their bank records. Remember, the the Ripple lawyers pointed out to Judge Netburn that said, Judge, we've given them every single XRP sale in the history of this company. And we've given them every single XRP sale that these two executives have ever made. This is a non-fraud case. They don't need to get into their bank accounts and their credit card statements. They don't need to see what Chris Larson's wife is spending money on or any of this, or what Chris Larson is spending money on. Why would the SEC do that? This gentleman in this article highlights it and says, because the SEC expected to bully them like they bully everyone else, and to go in and cause them to settle quickly, has no evidence of scienter. Remember that specific knowledge. They charged these two executives with recklessness, but did they have any evidence of it? Well, we're going to find out when these Hinman emails come out. But even if those Hinman emails shock us, as we've been told they will, that doesn't allow Ripple the ability to go after the SEC, because they're going to invoke these things. Now, so that answers a lot of the people's questions, I hope, because they keep saying, I've seen many tweets that say, what about malicious prosecution? And so the answer comes down to Congress, and that Congress has the actual ultimate role. And listen, it shouldn't be this hard, right? There should have been an investigation into this speech already. There should have been, Empower Oversight was inspired by XRP holders and launched their FOIA litigation. And look what was uncovered. And the most that we've gotten is a sitting congressman who asked the question to Gippy Grewal about whether or not the Hinman speech was screened by the ethics office, and he was a coward and would not, in fact, tell the truth. In fact, he hid behind, I can't talk about the speeches, whether or not it was screened by ethics because it's being litigated. Well, it's not being litigated anymore, is it? It's all coming out. So maybe he can answer that question finally, even though he could have answered it back then. But it all comes down to SEC oversight by the Congress. And that happens through investigations. I've said to us, there is a potential case that can be made against certain officials and also certain people who are not at the SEC, but we need an investigation. That's why I established Connect to Congress. And even though we've sent 100,000 messages, we still haven't been able to get the investigation. So you have to be persistent in communicating with your elected officials. Elections have consequences. Now, most of the time when I make a political statement on Twitter, half the people get mad at me and half the people don't. I'm someone who has voted Democrat and Republican all my life. I've went each way. I voted independent as well. I usually try to vote the incumbent out because they never do anything that they promise they're going to do. Let's remember, this isn't political, right? Clayton, who started this nonsense, was a Trump Republican appointee. Gary Gensler, who is arguably the worst bad faith political appointee regulator that I've ever witnessed, all right, basically has continued this. And we see how he gets on camera and he says, you could just register on our website and things like that. He is a bad faith person. He was, of course, appointed by Biden. We've got to clean the swamp. And the only way to do that is for Congress to do its job and for you to get involved. For those people out there that say that, it's always going to be like this, John, you're never going to change anything, I reject that, because even though it should have been more already, even though there should have been an investigation done already, we have pushed the envelope. We have inspired the Empower Oversights to get involved. They're not in the crypto. They don't know anything. They don't care anything about XRP. Okay. We've had congressmen ask questions. We're locking these people in when they don't answer the questions.